It is a profoundly absurd thought, perhaps even bordering on the tragically comical, that for 99% of human existence, our ancestors navigated a world of terrifying predators and scarce resources as mere fleshy vessels of unarticulated sensation, entirely devoid of words like anxiety or melancholy. They knew terror, certainly, a gut-wrenching, adrenaline-fueled surge that screamed, "run" or "fight." But could they distinguish it from a deep-seated, persistent dread about the saber-toothed tiger that might be lurking around the next bend? Or the inexplicable sorrow that settled upon them after a failed hunt? The answer, disturbingly, is no. Their internal lives were a chaotic, undifferentiated maelstrom of raw physiological responses: increased heart rate, muscle tension, weeping, laughter, a tightening in the chest, a warmth spreading through the body. These were not feelings in the modern sense. They were simply states of being, immediate and overwhelming, entirely lacking the lexical anchors we now take for granted. Imagine the sheer, unmitigated confusion. An individual experiences intense stomach cramps after consuming a questionable berry. This is physical pain. But then, a distinct, oppressive heaviness descends when a beloved child dies. Both are deeply unpleasant, internally manifest phenomena, yet without distinct labels, they remain undifferentiated, except by context and intensity. This fundamental inability to articulate, categorize, or even consciously differentiate nuanced internal states presented a colossal, unyielding barrier to effective social cohesion and personal understanding. How do you comfort someone if you can't even begin to grasp the specific texture of their internal suffering beyond its most obvious animalistic expression? How do you warn others effectively about a feeling of unease, a premonition, rather than a direct, observable threat? The stakes were not merely academic, they were survival. This linguistic void created not just personal distress, but a systemic inefficiency in group dynamics, hindering cooperation, problem-solving, and the very transmission of complex social knowledge. The central mystery, then, is not merely how we named our feelings, but why this seemingly abstract act became an absolute, unavoidable evolutionary imperative, a question whose answer lies buried beneath millennia of linguistic trial and error. The implications of this emotional illiteracy for early human societies were staggering, far beyond mere personal discomfort. They fundamentally hampered collective survival and cultural progression. Consider the most basic unit of social interaction: cooperation during a hunt. A seasoned hunter might experience a subtle, indefinable apprehension when approaching a watering hole that feels off. Without the vocabulary to articulate this nuanced intuition, to say, "I feel an unsettling dread," a foreboding that suggests danger even though I see none, his only recourse is a generalized alarm, perhaps a warning grunt or an exaggerated gesture. This ambiguity could lead to anything from an unnecessary retreat costing precious calories and time to a catastrophic ambush because the precise nature of the threat, or lack thereof, could not be communicated effectively. The economic cost, in terms of wasted effort and lost resources, was immense. Furthermore, the transmission of complex social rules and moral codes, crucial for larger, more stable groups, would have been severely stunted. How do you instill a sense of guilt or empathy without the words to define those internal states? Punishments could be meted out for transgressions, but the internal reasoning, the understanding of why an action was wrong in terms of its emotional impact on others, remained largely inaccessible. This limited the development of sophisticated justice systems and ethical frameworks, forcing reliance on brute force or simple retaliation. The subtle dynamics of power, allegiance, and betrayal, all predicated on interpreting emotional cues, remained largely uncodified, leading to constant low-level strife and suspicion. A member of the tribe expressing aggression might simply be labeled violent, without any understanding of the underlying anger, frustration, or fear that fueled such behavior, preventing any deeper resolution or preventative measures. The pressure mounted with every increase in group size and every new layer of social complexity. The rudimentary proto-languages that first emerged were primarily focused on immediate, concrete objects and actions: mammoth, spear, run, eat. The abstract, the subjective, the invisible landscape of the human psyche remained a silent, unaddressed problem, a communication chasm that threatened to undermine the very scaffolding of emerging civilization. The monumental leap from raw sensation to named emotion was not a sudden revelation, but a protracted evolutionary crawl, a process intricately tied to the very development of symbolic thought. Before words like anger or joy could exist, proto-humans first had to develop the cognitive capacity to represent abstract concepts at all. This began not with feelings, but with external phenomena. The sound of a bird's call became consistently associated with the bird itself, not just its immediate auditory experience. Then came the ability to represent things not immediately present, a drawing of a bison on a cave wall, indicating a past hunt or a desired future one. This ability to form and share symbols for the tangible was the bedrock. From there, the gaze slowly turned inward. Early attempts to label internal states likely began with observable physical manifestations. A person trembling and crying might be associated with a sound that eventually evolved into a word for grief or sadness. But initially, it simply described the behavior, not the internal feeling itself. The community observed the physiological response, associated a specific vocalization with that observed pattern, and through repeated usage and reinforcement, began to forge a shared understanding. This wasn't about introspection initially. It was about external, shared observation and the practical need to predict and respond to the behavior of others. If a specific sound or gesture consistently preceded a protective, nurturing behavior, that sound or gesture began to acquire an emotional valence for care or tenderness. The process was iterative, tentative, and undoubtedly fraught with miscommunications. The earliest emotional words were almost certainly tied to survival: fear noise, aggression snarl, comfort hum. As societies grew and the practical demands for nuanced social interaction intensified, the need to distinguish between subtle internal states became more pronounced. This refinement required more than just mimicry. It demanded a growing capacity for theory of mind, the ability to infer the mental states of others, a cognitive skill directly facilitated by a shared, evolving lexicon of internal experience. It was a slow, arduous linguistic ascent, fueled by the relentless pressure to understand both self and other in an increasingly complex world. Once the initial, rudimentary emotional lexicon had been established, a profound cognitive revolution commenced, transforming not only human communication, but the very structure of human thought and society. The act of naming an emotion, such as fear, allowed ancient humans to do something entirely new, to categorize it, to analyze its triggers, to anticipate its arrival, and crucially, to share that understanding. This was no longer merely a physiological response. It became an abstract concept that could be discussed, debated, and transmitted across generations. This lexicalization of internal states unleashed a powerful domino effect across every facet of human existence. Empathy, once a largely instinctual, automatic response, could now be cultivated and reasoned. "I understand you feel grief" became a statement laden with shared understanding, allowing for more targeted comfort, communal mourning rituals, and social support systems that were previously unimaginable. Conflict resolution shifted dramatically. Instead of merely reacting to aggression, individuals could now articulate their anger and negotiate resolutions, leading to more stable, less violent social structures. Storytelling, a fundamental human activity for transmitting knowledge and values, gained an unprecedented depth. Narratives could now explore the emotional journeys of characters, teaching listeners about courage, betrayal, loyalty, and love through vicarious experience. This was critical for the formation of complex moral frameworks, as the emotional consequences of actions could be explicitly detailed and learned. The cultural footprint of this linguistic explosion is evident in the sheer diversity of emotional vocabularies across different human languages. Some cultures developed specific terms for emotions that others lack, like the German Schadenfreude, pleasure derived from another's misfortune, or the Portuguese saudade, a deep emotional state of nostalgic or profound melancholic longing for an absent something or someone. These unique words do not merely describe existing feelings, they shape the emotional reality and experience of their speakers, illustrating how the very act of naming fundamentally influences what emotions are perceived, valued, and even felt within a community. We named our feelings not just to communicate them, but because the act of naming them literally changed our minds, enabling a depth of social cognition and cultural richness that was previously impossible. The ultimate irony, a darkly humorous punchline to millennia of linguistic struggle, is that the very solution to our ancient problem, the arduous process of naming every conceivable human feeling, has arguably birthed a new, equally perplexing predicament. By providing precise labels for our internal states, we gained an unparalleled ability to communicate, to empathize, and to build intricate social structures. Yet, in doing so, we simultaneously opened the floodgates to an incessant, often debilitating torrent of self-analysis. Our ancestors, in their blissful ignorance, simply felt the primal pang of fear. They didn't then spend hours dissecting whether it was general anxiety disorder, social phobia, or a specific phobia triggered by existential dread stemming from childhood trauma. They simply reacted. We, on the other hand, are now burdened by an encyclopedic lexicon of inner turmoil, constantly scrutinizing, categorizing, and pathologizing every flicker of internal discomfort. The very words that were meant to connect us, to bring clarity to the chaos, can now isolate us within the labyrinth of our own minds, turning simple emotional experiences into complex psychological puzzles requiring specialized professional intervention. The modern therapeutic industry, a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, is entirely predicated on this vast, intricate tapestry of named emotions, promising to help us navigate the very emotional landscape our ancestors inadvertently charted. We traded the confusion of not knowing what we felt for the tyranny of knowing too much, for the relentless demand to articulate, define, and ultimately control every minute nuance of our psyche. The primal, unmediated experience of joy or sorrow is now often filtered through a critical, analytical lens, constantly appraised against a medicalized, cultural ideal. We solved the problem of an uncommunicable internal world by creating a world so intensely communicable that its very articulation becomes a source of endless existential contemplation. What a grand, elaborate joke on humanity, that in learning to describe the subjective, we perhaps lost a piece of its raw, untamed essence, substituting the immediate, visceral truth for an intellectualized, categorized echo.